they're being denied the opportunity to grow in the way that they should be able to. Understanding how to protect yourself and defend yourself with the right tools is going to make a huge difference, not only to yourself, but overall to our society. For a lot of businesses and the way that they operate in a manner where accountability is not their priority, and transparency of any process is also not a priority because that leads to further accountability.
Welcome to Simple Sense for Small Business, where we talk about big and small mistakes small business owners make. Today, we're talking to Mahir Nisar. Mahir is an employment discrimination attorney. You have to check out his TikTok, where he gives practical advice and approachable advice for employee advocacy. When it comes to the law, Mahir, I'm going to have you introduce yourself a little bit more in depth because it's so fascinating and I have a lot of thoughts and questions. So let's kick it off with, and you're a professional podcaster, so you can give me some tips.
Well, absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Linda, for having me. My name is Mahir Nisar. I'm an employment discrimination attorney based in New York City. And the focus of what I do is primarily educating and empowering individuals to be able to advocate for themselves within the workplace, to know their workplace rights. A lot of the content that I put out is on TikTok and other forms of social media, Instagram, LinkedIn. And really the focus is trying to empower people. The more that people have a voice for what they're going through, people have opportunity to be able to voice their concerns, object to things that are happening. We're living in an environment right now where the mental illness is just skyrocketing. And that is reflective of the very abusive and exploitive types of businesses that are out there. So I'm hoping to kind of shed light on that, try to bring awareness to it, try to help empower people to be able to fight against that type of an oppressive model, as well as hopefully try to educate small businesses and businesses that are medium and large to perhaps change their ways so that way people do not suffer any longer, because that shouldn't be the focus of what businesses do. It's not about hurting people. It's about making sure that those people continue to thrive and grow with your company as they put in so much time and effort in helping you grow.
Wow. I think the first question I'd love to kick off with you is there a size business that you work with that you see people mainly reaching out to you about?
I mean, my primary focus is usually working with employees primarily.
Okay.
So oftentimes we see employees from all types of businesses, from businesses that are mom and pops with maybe 1 to 2 employees to as high as the biggest companies that are out there that are well known, and we ultimately do review and see exactly what type of practices that those companies are engaged in and what they have done to the employee and what rights have been violated. And we, in essence, hold them accountable under the law through various means. So oftentimes we'll see, I don't think there's any company out there that does not run into the law. It's very rare that they remain in compliance to the point where they don't do these things. A lot of people aren't really aware about what they need to do. A lot of employment attorneys that are on the defense side that represent employers, they will seek to try to limit the exposure for those companies. And we're, in essence, out there to expose them, especially when they violate people's rights.
Do you work with employees all over the country?
I primarily practice in New York and New Jersey because obviously due to the number of people that reach out to me through social media, what I try to do is I try to connect them with attorneys locally that we've, gotten to know over a period of time. I usually either refer them to them or I refer them through the National Employment Lawyers Association, which is a national plaintiffs organization that only represents employees. And that's, in essence, an organization of employment lawyers throughout the country that are dedicated to people. So I use those platforms as a ways to connect people to attorneys so that they can actually get the legal assistance that they need. But there are very, very rare examples where we may actually practice out of my specific areas, the states of practice, is when there is a situation where perhaps we might be able to co-counsel with local attorneys in a specific state. But those are rare situations. It depends on the case type, the case value, the case substance. That all plays a big role in whether or not we can actually work with another attorney and kind of help that individual.
I think with When I think about small business owners, our practice has always been to assist small business owners in one way or another, whether it's financing or just our little, small business advice channel here on Simple Sense for Small Business. And when I hear that, you are faced with how often you're attending to employees and advocating for employees, what would you say for small business owners is the number one issue that you see consistently that employees complain about that you have to address?
So I think I'm in a bit of a niche, especially in light of the fact that I focus on employment discrimination. So oftentimes the people that do reach out to me do have concerns about how they're being treated, whether it's on the basis of their race, on the basis of their gender, sexual orientation, or disability. They may get pregnant, and now the employer, whether it's a small business, may not know how to handle that situation. There might be scenarios where that individual needs to care for a loved one that has a serious illness and needs help, and they may have caregiving responsibilities, and the employer does not know how to navigate that situation. And at times they may make mistakes. And so a lot of times we see scenarios in which certain employers are either they lack some level of awareness on their unconscious bias, their implicit biases, their prejudices that are built in within their mind and how they speak and how they deal with people. And so a lot of times that leads to potential liability. And then there are other circumstances where they don't understand that their company has certain legal obligations in terms of how they need to provide certain leave options and accommodations for individuals that have disabilities and maybe pregnant or caregiving responsibilities. And then beyond that, there are scenarios where small businesses are often, violating the law as far as the labor laws go. And that involves scenarios in which, they're not paying people the appropriate wages, they're misclassifying people, placing people on 1099s when they're actually employees, and they may not be paying them the right amount, not paying them the overtime that they're entitled to. And all of that becomes a big source of liability for that company and that individual owner, because there's potentially even personal liability associated with it. It makes sense for a small business owner to really evaluate that when they're doing business, when they're hiring people to work for them, that they understand what the rights of those employees are and what they need to do to make sure that they're catering to an environment where they're in check with what the laws require, so that they don't end up in a position where their business is now impacted by a potential judgment.
One of the things that I find a little surprising, and maybe you can shed some light on this, there are resources to prevent those types of things from happening. Human resource consultants. The first baseline is knowing by law, if you have a certain number of employees or whatever the federal or state regulations are, how is it, are they just avoiding or hoping they don't get found out? Like, how do they not be more preventative? Is that the word, preventive or preventative?
Yeah, I think it's like anything else, preparation is key. And when you're conducting and doing any kind of business, what do you do before you start it? The foundations are extremely important. A lot of people, and especially as a lawyer, we're kind of built with the thought process of trying to be more preventative by looking at things that haven't happened to try to avoid them from happening, especially if we're representing a business. And I have represented businesses in the past. And that's really what the focus is. And a lot of times clients, they have a deep seated type of insecurity about working with lawyers that are trying to prevent something that hasn't happened in the future, because they think that, well, it hasn't happened, so why are you dedicating so much time to something that hasn't happened? But the truth is that when you work with a lawyer, it's so important to understand, not only is it that you need to develop a relationship of trust, but more importantly, you're looking to prevent things. And that preventative type of process is about making sure that your foundations, your underlying agreements, your contracts, all the things that you're going to be engaging in, the people that you're going to be dealing with, that there is a level of compliance that your company remains in, so that you're not in a position down the road, well, because you didn't really look into it, now you're going to be expending so much money and time and effort, taking away from your focus of running a business to now really trying to save the business. And that really defeats the whole purpose of doing business in the first place. So I think a lot of people just get up and they see that they're starting to find some interest in their services, their products, and they start focus on making money, and then they forget that there are other aspects to running a business that you need to protect that. And so I think a lot of times people learn about it in the very, very difficult way, and then they get discouraged. and then they're like, "Oh, running a business in this country is very difficult," but it's not. It's just you have to be a bit more prepared. You need to make sure that you have the professionals there, whether it's an accountant, a lawyer, having people, consultants that are going to be able to advise you along the way. I mean, there's no way to do everything on your own. You need to be able to delegate. You need to be able to use the right resources to be able to make sure that your growth is protected. You're not going to grow unless you make sure that your company has those resources alongside with you.
How do employees know more than the small business owner to know to start a process that is adverse, that's emotional? The employees who are working for a business know more than the business owner who's running the business, to have to educate them in a in a conflict management kind of style.
Honestly, I don't think that there's more knowledge on behalf of employees. I think, unfortunately, we live in a society where there is a there's just a lack of education and awareness about what people's legal rights are and how to defend it, how to go about it. There's just not, it's not there. That's kind of why I put out the content that I put out, is because of the fact that there isn't that. And to try to, in a lot of companies and business owners, obviously they're all people as well. And so nobody goes through, unless they go to business school, which is, I mean, they'll have courses on these things, but outside of that, like if you go through school, you go through college, you're not going to come across any type of education that is going to prepare you for dealing with these very real life scenarios that you may have to deal with. And how to go about it is very systematic and based upon the system that exists. And so, as an employment attorney that deals intricately with the litigation process of filing things and seeing how things play out, a lot of my tips to employees, in many ways it can be used by employers as well, is to navigate that, to try to find a way to advocate for themselves through that process. So I think I think a lot of employees, they learn about their situation once they experience something. They're like, this
Mhm.
doesn't feel right to me. You know, I'm pregnant. I shouldn't. I mean, I've heard about this. I've heard that people have maternity leave. I've heard that I can't be treated differently from what I've heard in the news. Or perhaps they see something in the news about sexual harassment, which has been, you know, obviously with the Me Too movement, has been very widespread in terms of education and awareness, as well as many other social justice issues, whether it's Black Lives Matters, whether it's other forms of anti-Asian hate following the pandemic, whether it's, you know, with the rise of mental illness and seeing what kind of medical accommodation one has. I think that people that fall within certain categories, when they actually see that, you know what, that's me, that's what I could experience. I see somebody going through it, and when they're in that position, they're able to associate and recognize it. Whereas, you know, a small business owner, it may not come across those situations as they're not in that particular position, and they may not be in tune with people's experiences beyond their own, which is really important, right? Because a lot of our states and cities require certain forms of trainings. Here in New York, there are mandated required trainings that have to could be conducted on sexual harassment, equal opportunity, diversity, whatever it may be. All those different forms of training are meant not only for the co-workers and the employees in the environment, but also in essence for the actual employer. They have to know what they are responsible for and what they're required to make sure that they maintain in terms of an environment. So those are the things I think that I don't think that there's generally an unequal base of knowledge. It's just a matter of who experiences what when.
And information, right? And
Right,
about
right.
how people are accessing information, which is why your social media is so important. They're, you know, under a minute videos, and they're packed with basic information that employers, you know, could know better, right? Or just have that information accessible. Like, it would not be crazy for an employer to pay attention to your channels, right? Because they'll see what behaviors are walking the line, right?
Yeah, sure.
Would you say that employers, when it comes to a situation that escalate. Would you say there's a higher level of arrogance or ignorance when it comes to the scenario or what is happening? Are they like, I didn't know, or it's like, well, sue me, is there, do you see that, or is that not really the case?
Yeah, I do. It's a mix. It could be a combination of ego. It can be a combination of ignorance. It could be different perspectives on facts that exist. And there can be a different perspective on facts. There isn't always just one way of seeing something. And sometimes they don't have the empathy to really understand their employees' perspectives and understand how it may impact them, especially when perhaps if it's coupled with other issues, they can't see past that. And as business owners, they tend to be very focused on the actual fight rather than focusing their mind on the business. And so it's very important. I always tell when I used to represent businesses, I used to advise my business owners that it's really important for you to focus on your business. You need to focus on making sure that you're doing the work that you have set out to do. If you start to get involved in battles with employees and legal battles, you're taking away time that you're not going to get back again. And you're taking away money that you're not going to get back again. So it's setting you back. And so
Mhm.
it's important to figure out, like, okay, if this is happening, what are the right business decisions that I need to make for my business to make sure that I limit my exposure? How do I minimize the damage that I'm being exposed to? And make those very, very calculated decisions without getting emotional, because when you're running a business and you allow your emotions to get involved, that's just not the way business is conducted. And if you start to do it that way, I mean, I understand a lot of people, and myself included, as a business owner, I think we spend so much time building, growing, trying to deal with the pains, the losses, the challenges, the environments that are really making us wonder whether or not we'll survive. And it happens, and it's your perseverance, it's your focus, it's your determination, and it's your belief in what you're doing as a means of making a living and as a means of providing a service to make a difference, whatever that may be. If you have a vision of value that you're looking to project and provide, you need to stand behind it. And at times you're going to have to make decisions that may not sit well with you initially, but you have to look at the bigger picture. It's not about the short term, it's about the long term. And if your business has that long term objective, it makes sense that you have teams, you have people, you care about the people, that you demonstrate that the people that are there, that you value and appreciate them and you respect them, because they're going to be extremely important in your growth. And so if you end up just being one of those people that is just focused on doing things by yourself and not really, you're trying to act like you know it all and nobody else can really do and take on your shoes, you're just going to be stuck, and you're just going to be spinning the wheels by yourself. And that's just not a way to grow a business.
I think it's really hard as humans to learn how to not be emotional when something's emotional. There's a bit of a balance, right? Because you want to be emotional to be empathetic, but then you have to like kind of be as factual and practical as possible when it comes to approaching conflict or adverse situations. The discrimination piece is super sensitive. Would you say that performance reviews or performance appraisals of some kind on a regular basis, does that help, or does that, it doesn't matter because the discrimination is separate and apart from performance?
There's value in performance reviews when there are issues that exist in terms of performance. The issues that I usually have with performance reviews are when they're weaponized as means of engaging in discrimination. And oftentimes, a lot of employers, they tend to use performance improvement and corrective action mechanisms as means to push out employees on the basis of their performance, because performance is one of those subjective elements that exist, that they're the only ones that actually view whether or not they're happy with the performance. And so it kind of gives them that additional power to be able to control the narrative and to be able to say, you know what, your performance is not getting better. We give you a chance. It's not working. And they can make up that narrative and develop that trail to allow them to do what they want to do, which is to ultimately get rid of the person. Whereas in certain circumstances, if there are legitimate concerns about one's performance, You got to give the person an opportunity and the environment and the tools to be able to succeed. If you don't, then you're setting them up for failure. And I think that's really where the distinction lies, is are you setting up somebody for success, or are you setting them up for failure?
Wow. I mean, that alone seems like it's very simple, but I think going back to what you said about where ego could possibly be, get involved, that might confuse and compete with, intentions or understanding of that as a basic principle. Absolutely brilliant. So here's another question. On your social media channels, a lot of your content addresses how the employer may be treating the employee, and unbeknownst to the employee, that's not cool. You share a lot to have warnings of when an employee should be concerned about the future of their position or the security of their job. How does an employer just like clandestine go about trying to remove an employee? Are there ways to not do it that way? Can you be more transparent, or do you have to be like subterfuge so they do all these not nice things? That doesn't seem kosher to me. What do you think?
One of the biggest challenges that exist for businesses in general, especially from the perspective of employees, to feel as if they want to remain in an environment, is the accountability process as well as the transparency of that accountability. There is a lack of transparency in the processes that exist within companies. There is a lack of it to the extent that people do not feel that whatever is being done with the intent to try to address the concerns of the employee. And when people see that the cards are stacked up against them, that they don't have a shot, where they feel as if, because of the power dynamic, because this person holds the ability to hire and fire me, the ability to control whether or not I grow or I fail, that it's a very, very difficult circumstance for an individual to be in. And it's very, very disheartening. For a lot of businesses, in the way that they operate in a manner where accountability is not their priority, and transparency of any process is also not a priority, because that leads to further accountability. I think the power dynamics certainly play a huge role. One of the tools that I provide are developing paper trails. And that, for an employee that understands, okay, that these rights of mine are being violated, this is what I feel is some aspect of how I feel I'm being treated differently, my opportunity is being impacted. You see, the way that opportunity is impacted is very nuanced, and it's very, very delicate. And it's very hard sometimes to even detect, because you're not living life looking for circumstances in which you're being set up to fail, because you have this type of belief that an environment that you're in, with all the other people that are there, that everybody has a fair shot. You can't yourself audit yourself and be like, you know what, I feel like I'm being treated differently than everybody else here. I feel like I'm being singled out. Then because there's this thought process. Oh, it's all in your head, and that's where the gaslighting starts. That's where the companies start to double down and be like, no, everybody's being treated the same. The way that you feel, maybe you just feel like this because, I don't know, maybe you're just imagining it, right? And that's where the whole gaslighting process, that whole idea came from, is these experiences where people that experience and start to notice that no matter what they do, they're not going to be able to win. They're not going to be able to grow. They're not going to be able to succeed. They're not going to have that ability to get that promotion, because the way that people are looking at them, or not even looking at them, the way that people are considering them or not considering them, it just doesn't exist. It's these little things that start to build up and become recognizable to that individual, that I don't really think I have a fair shot here to grow. I think the cards are stacked up against me. And when employers do not recognize that there are certain people that feel this way, that the environment has individuals that are perpetuating certain biases, and they're not addressing it because they want to protect themselves and not hurt themselves, it becomes a major issue that ultimately really hurts people. I mean, just imagine if you're working really hard, you go through school, you go through college, you work hard to get the right grades, you conform, you raise your hand, you participate, you do all the things to make yourself be in the position that when you're in this real world, that people will treat you fairly, and that you'll have an opportunity to rise based upon your skills, the abilities that you have developed all those things that you've done to be able to grow, and then somehow or the other you recognize, oh wow, that person didn't even give me a shot here. That person didn't give me an opportunity. I didn't get the opportunity that that person got, although I feel I'm better qualified. I didn't get an opportunity to present. I mean, this happens oftentimes. Like, they didn't get an opportunity to be on that project. They weren't called to a happy hour. They weren't invited. They weren't included in the email that dealt with the project itself. The client didn't see me there. All these type of situations indicate that you're being systematically pushed out by people that just don't want to see you there.
That is unbelievable. So this prompts a question. Oh, Trevor, here he comes.
Yeah.
I'm madly in love with you right now.
Hi, Trevor. How are you?
I was just overhearing a lot of what you were just talking about, and that lack of power that employees have, and the lack of control over their own destiny. When you are someone who owes child support or has to pay child support,
Oh, yeah.
as I did for the last 2 decades, and you work on 100% commission, and you work in an industry populated by thieves and criminals and scammers, I have struggled with everything you just described, Mahir, for more than 2 decades. So thank you for sharing that, because more people need to hear your message. So hopefully we'll get 85,000 views on this video.
Do you know if more people just say, you know what, I'm just going to get out of here? Or like what Trevor was saying, he had very few choices because of child support issues. So when you have external forces that are sort of preventing or restricting flexibility in how you earn money, how do employees cope with, all right, do I just make this a full-blown thing, or do I just go away quietly? And, how does that work? How do you see that often?
You just show up every day because you have to.
It's tough. And there's no question. All these things that you just mentioned are very, very pertinent to the thought process that occurs in the mind of somebody that's dealing with this. The first thing, and I believe in and I advocate for, is the idea that leaving environments is not the key. I know that people will say, move on, get out of there. And I think that makes sense to a certain extent at certain particular times, especially when it's hurting your mental health. That's the time where you're like, it's not worth it. Nothing is more important than your health. If you start to give up your health for an employer, that is not good. It's not acceptable. It's not something that you should ever do. That being said, if there are circumstances in which you believe that your rights are being violated, these rights have been fought for by people that have come before you. They have sacrificed their lives in an effort to have these rights when people did not have these rights. And so when you are put in a position where you feel as if these rights that you have are being violated, you need to equip yourself with the tools to be able to advocate for yourself, to seek accountability for it. When you do that, it impacts you because it now empowers you against that employer. It gives you an opportunity to address and seek accountability for what you have been made to experience in that environment. It helps heal, and it also helps change that environment. Now, not everybody is going to be equipped and able to do that, but let me just tell you, everybody can. How? They have to understand the power of the paper trail. The paper trail works. If you know exactly how to develop a paper trail, it's going to make a difference and put the employer in a position where they'll have absolutely no better choice than to actually deal with your concerns. So specifically, I always advise people that are working in an environment where they feel as if they're being treated unfairly to document their complaints via email, to complain to their HR, whoever is designated that controls the terms and conditions of your employment, to specify the unlawful treatment so that way it falls into the protection of the law. Meaning that if you're experiencing racial discrimination, specify it, say it clearly. Don't beat around the bush and say I'm being discriminated against. It's not clear. It needs to be specific. Racial discrimination, gender discrimination. And you need to retain copies of these things. You got to keep them. Your company has it in their servers. They'll lock you out as soon as they know that you don't have it. So you got to make sure you keep everything. So that 3-step process is key to me because I've seen it work and I've seen it actually play out in where the employee now has a voice. And now they put the employer in a position where they have to investigate, correct, rectify. And if they do the right thing, they will then eventually change that environment because of that individual. And that individual will feel a sense of empowerment and knowledge that, okay, I stood my ground and I don't have to be treated this way ever again. And the more people that are able to do this, it can change the landscape of how employees actually operate and how employers see employees. And so it's a matter of educating enough people to be informed of how to use this simple tool. And
Mm.
that can really truly make a difference. So I think is my main message. Even with my TikToks, I think the majority of my TikToks and videos that I put out is just giving people this specific tool, because I know it works. I know it can make a difference. Let's say, for instance, the employer retaliates. Let's say they say that you complained and then they retaliate against you. Well, now you have a case of retaliation. You can hold them accountable for that. It is a double-edged sword using a paper trail. And either way, if neither of those things work and it's something that doesn't make, it's not like you're not getting anywhere, that's when you start strategizing your exit to figure out what is the best avenue for you to get out of there. With all these experiences, nobody should ever deny themselves access to mental health treatment, because if you're being denied an opportunity, if you're being denied and pushed down or treated unfairly, slowly but surely through their subconscious and your mind and the way that you think and how you process environments, it's going to impact you. You're just not going to be able to see people the same way. You're not going to be able to experience environments in the same way. And you should not allow your mind to remain in that type of a state, the state of fear. You need to start to build up and try to heal through that, get the treatment, and be able to come back in empowered, knowing what you need to do in the future, so that way you can be treated fairly and hopefully succeed in whatever that means to you.
I'd like to ask a technical question that may seem very basic, but when you discussed about the paper trail and sending an email and being specific in your observation or your complaint, you had mentioned about getting locked out of the server once they feel that, okay, this is going to escalate. Should they email from the business email, or should they email and maybe CC themselves on a personal email, or BCC themselves on a personal email so that they have access to it always, not rely on the business resources for that documentation?
This is always an interesting discussion as to how does one email. Number one, there are company policies that exist. Company policies are not law. Company policies are meant to protect the company. And a lot of companies do not like that you have any correspondence that relates to the company in your possession. So oftentimes they may have certain limitations in your ability to print out or save copies of these things. But my argument is that these are protected activities under the law. And because they're protected activities under the law, and you're specifically only keeping that form of evidence that protects your narrative and what you were complaining about, I find it to be something that it's okay. And so I think that if you're going to be emailing, you can email from your personal email. You can email from your business email and BCC yourself. You can take a screenshot of the email that you sent through your company email. If you print it out, if you BCC, a lot of times certain companies nowadays, they'll know, because they'll be able to check their company email to see exactly what type of activity you've engaged in, including printing, including BCC. So just keep that in mind. And I don't really think that that's that big of a deal, to be quite honest with you, because it's not like you're doing something. They know you're sending them an email, right? You're sending them
Right.
an email. The fact that they know that you have it, to be quite frank with you, it's not about them not knowing that you have it. As a matter of fact, you want them to know that you have it, because when they know that you have it, they treat you completely differently. If they don't know that you have it and they suspect that you don't have it, they may be willing to do things that they ordinarily would do when they know that you don't have evidence, which is perhaps bad things. And that's when you hit them. But you don't want them to do the bad things. You don't want them to do that. You want them to change. You want them to make a difference to the environment that is causing you the concerns that you have. It's not like you're out to like surprise them. You're not. You're in that process to hold them accountable to the law in light of what you're going through, so that they have an opportunity to evaluate it and to do the right thing. That's the issue. People need to put people into the position where they do the right thing, because they're not going to do it unless they're pushed to do it.
That's a really good point. I feel like if that's going to set them off, that you've BCC'd yourself or CC'd yourself and made it very transparent, then this was going to not go well anyway. If that's the thing that gets them to, for them to hold on to as an employer, when an employee is just trying to do the right thing for themselves and hold an employer accountable to do the right thing.
We want to educate people to empower them with their legal rights. And I think that most people that are going to come across this podcast or have an opportunity to review some of your videos and my videos, understanding what your rights are as far as your employment goes is extremely important. Everybody that comes to the United States, whether it's you're here or you're coming from abroad, you're here to make a living. You're making a living, you're growing, you're trying to build a life for yourself. And the last thing that anybody deserves to ever have to experience is that they're being denied the opportunity to grow in the way that they should be able to. Understanding how to protect yourself and defend yourself with the right tools is going to make a huge difference, not only to yourself, but overall to our society.
Have you found that employees that have to launch an escalated scenario, do you see that they end up starting their own business and they just leave, and this perpetuates them to practice their entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah, oftentimes I always get this comment on my TikTok videos, especially when I'm talking about very difficult experiences that people routinely experience due to discrimination, that I do see people comment and say, hey, start your own business. Just get out of this. Stop being an employee and focus on building up your own employment. So, I mean, I don't think it's that easy to run a business, number one. I don't think everybody necessarily will find it is something that's simple. It's not. It's hard. It's very difficult. And it's a different type of mindset and energy that needs to be utilized. It's a level of stress that I think has to be really well managed. But I do often see a lot of people that experience these things go off on their own and realize, you know what, I'm never going to work for anyone ever again. I'm just not going to do it. I'm never going to put myself in a position where I'm going to be made to experience that I'm lesser than who I am. Because if anybody sees me in this way, I'm just not going to put myself in that position. People feel very strongly about it, and I understand it. I think that if you're able to have the right tools and resources to build your own business and you have the right product and the right services, make sure that you're a business that doesn't do exactly what you experienced, right? You want to make sure that your business is going to be a business that's going to be an opportunity for people to grow in, and that recognition. I mean, when you're making money, say thank you to the people that are working with you. Show to them that without them, you wouldn't be there, because it's true. If you don't acknowledge it, if you don't respect it, if you don't value them, then slowly but surely, it's just going to be you. That's fine. That's what you do, but then don't bring people on. Bring people on because you want them to go on the journey with you and be a part of it. Don't bring them along as people that are like goats in the process. Be kind, be respectful, be appreciative. But if somebody does decide that they want to start up a new business, look and see what it takes. It's not easy, but it certainly is an opportunity. It's just certainly an option for people that have gone through this, but it's not that easy.
Such a perfect ending. I'm so glad I slipped in that question. Cannot thank you enough. I would love for you to share where people can find you exactly, and all the links will be in the description and the show notes. People need to know, if they're an employee, they need to know what their rights are. So please share where we can find you.
Yeah, you're more than welcome to check out the TikTok. It's at Discrimination Lawyer. Also find me on Instagram at Nisar Law, and feel free to connect even on LinkedIn if you happen to want to follow along with some of the content that I post there.
Thank you so,
Awesome.
so very
You're
much.
welcome. Thanks for
Really
having me.
appreciate your time. Really appreciate it.
Likewise.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.